Awesome. Al, so good to have you here. I've been really looking forward to this conversation. So
Yeah,
maybe we
likewise.
could just, yeah, thank you. Maybe we could just start by you telling us a little bit about how you got here.
Sure. Hey, Ty, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me. So, my name is Al Harnisch, currently VP of Business Development at Radar, which is a Series C SaaS startup in the mobile location space, which I'm sure we'll get more into. Quick background on me, I kind of cut my teeth at a company called Dealer.com up in Burlington, Vermont. They provided everything from websites to SEO services and ad tech services for the automotive industry and for car dealers. Grew a lot while I was there. I was employed, give or take 150. When I left, there was like 1,200 employees. They had a $1 billion exit, which is pretty rare for Vermont, but I'll give the great state of Vermont a quick shout out there. Um, After that, I wanted to kind of try something new and move to a new city. So I moved to New York City, found a company called Prolific, which I ended up being there for the next 6 years and kind of really established myself in the mobile space. So Prolific was a product and growth agency. The growth came a little bit later. That's kind of what I started. But in a nutshell, we worked with enterprise brands and startups alike, helping them to build their mobile apps. And this was in 2013 to 2019 was when I was there. So especially in the earlier side of that, a lot of companies didn't have mobile apps yet, and it was still kind of a new thing for a lot of brands. We worked with a lot of retailers. Some of the early ones were Rent the Runway or Alex and Ani or David's Bridal or Lily Pulitzer, SoulCycle. The list goes on, but towards the end, we were working with American Express and Walmart and a lot of other really large brands. So also a really great success story. I came on originally at Prolific as more of a strategist, helping brands kind of figure out how to approach mobile for the first time. These are brands that had a website and they're like, this iPhone thing is here to stay. We want to build a mobile app. How do we approach it? What features should it have? How should it be similar or different from the website? And I kind of just help brands figure out their strategy there. Um, After a year or two of doing that, I pretty quickly kind of realized that there was a big gap in understanding the customer behavior and being able to use the app as a marketing tool instead of just quote unquote another website or another place for customers to engage with your brand. So, how are we bringing push notifications to our customers from an agency perspective? How are we bringing analytics to our customers? How are we helping them with deep linking and attribution? How are we, you know, giving them best practices on how to implement all these SDKs once they get that far? And so I started kind of developing relationships with the CDPs of the world, the analytic platforms of the world, the mobile first engagement tools. The list goes on, and that's kind of how I got my footing in the partnership world. It was almost by accident, but as these companies were all kind of growing, I kind of built out one of the first service arms of like what has become known as like the mobile growth stack. Um, and as we built services on these, and as all these companies were just starting to think about partnerships and how that could, how they could leverage solution partners and agencies to grow their own business, um, a lot of synergies kind of came out of that. And I ended up building really strong partnerships with a number of companies. And starting like a dedicated growth stack practice at Prolific. Did that for a number of years, and by the time we exited, we ended up getting acquired. But by the time we were acquired, that was about a 15 or 20 person team, and we were doing about maybe 15 or 20% of the revenue of Prolific was coming through that service. It was our fastest growing service, and it was really exciting and really fun because we were working so closely with all these SaaS brands that were growing so quickly. Um, we exited to WeWork, which is a whole nother story that I won't get too deep into. But I was at WeWork very briefly before I made the jump over to Radar, where I am today. I joined Radar as VP of Business Development. When I joined, they had just raised their Series B. There are about 20 people, looking to make a run at it and get to kind of the next level themselves. So I've been there 2.5 years, and even though with COVID, it was a little rocky at times. We ended up seeing a lot of growth since I joined, and it's been a lot of fun. And I've built out a 5-person business development and partnerships team here. We have, an arm of the BD side that is focused on tech partnerships, an arm that is focused on agency partnerships, and our goal is to build really strong partnerships that are bringing value two ways. But ultimately, from our perspective, we want to be driving pipeline, and we want to be driving revenue through those deals. So that's kind of where I am today, and a quick 101 on my background. And yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Amazing. Love it. Thank you so much. And yeah, I'm excited to dig into the prolific stuff, especially because we obviously worked together a bunch while I was at
Yeah,
Amplitude, and no favorites, but you're definitely one of my favorite people to work with. And so excited to
likewise.
dig into that. So something that's always fun is like looking back at your time at Dealer. Do you did you engage with partners when you were there, or were there opportunities to work with partners, knowing what you know now?
Yeah, so I was more in like a analyst position there. So I wasn't necessarily working with partners, but what I was doing and what I did learn a lot about is business intelligence, analytics, and specifically for a while I was doing like product optimization there. So working with Adobe Analytics, Google Analytics, a few others, but companies along those lines, kind of like the previous generation of analytic and optimization tools, as well as just like our data warehouse, and I forget what the program was, but we used like some janky old school like ways to kind of analyze that. But I kind of gravitated towards Google Analytics. I thought it was really interesting at the time. Believe it or not, it was like the bleeding edge of web analytics, and we did all sorts of experiments and analyses that allowed us to um, like do create real increases in the conversion rate, the engagement rate, form submissions for car dealerships, and ultimately at dealer they were able to measure like how exactly what the conversion rate of a lead on your website is to buying a car. And this is at a time, shortly after the 2008 financial crisis, when half of Detroit went out of business. The automotive space was in a really bad spot, but dealer was able to grow pretty aggressively by saying, "Hey, give us your radio budget, give us your TV budget. We will tell you exactly how many leads you can get, and we'll tell you exactly how much revenue you can expect that to turn into." And no other advertising medium could turn in, could be that precise and that specific. So it was a really cool job in the sense that if we were able to impact conversion rate on a website by 5%, we could translate that into real revenue. And so I kind of like, I guess, to answer your question, I really learned like the fundamentals of those types of analyses and the value there. And then when I went to Prolific and noticed that that was kind of missing from the mobile space, I was kind of scratching my head and then started doing some research and found at that time it was like Mixpanel or Segment or Appboy before they were called Berets, and tools like that. And that's kind of how I started to get curious about that space.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think one of the things that you did an amazing job of there was, like this articulation of the growth stack, and like really building a solution around that you could take to customers. Um, and I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges that a partnerships person who's working with agencies faces, is like, how ultimately the agency wants to sell more services and make their customers more successful, right? And who knows which order that's in, but those are like important things. And Tech companies want to help them do that, but ultimately want to generate opportunities for themselves. And I think you guys did a really good job of codifying what like an amplitude, a braze, and like a segment or an M particle meant for the customer in like a tangible outcome way. And I would love to just hear a little bit about like how that came together, because I think you guys did that in a really good way. We tried to do that ourselves with like I worked closely with the Braze team, and we really tried to build a joint solution that we could bring to other digital agencies, and it like definitely didn't work as well as what you and the team were doing. Would love to hear a little bit about how that came together.
I think the first company I actually spoke to was mParticle, late 2013 or maybe super early 2014, like probably within 6 months or a year of them being founded. But they actually reached out to me and said, hey, we know you guys work with X, Y, and Z customers, and we're really interested in working with them as well. Let's chat. And I saw their pitch, and it just seemed really interesting. And at Dealer, I had some exposure into Segment, because they had actually started as on websites. So I kind of knew the idea of what is now called a CDP. At the time, I don't think it was, but it was, basically, hey, we'll just install our SDK or our JavaScript if it's a website once, and then you can connect to all these other things on the server side, and it's a lot less dev work. And that really resonated because on the agency side, working for customers and clients with budgets, we were always looking for ways to streamline the process and give them more value. And so that became really interesting. And then from there, I started to get more familiar with those other tools, the Amplitudes of the world, the Brazes of the world, the attribution tools, and using kind of mParticle and then later on Segment as well as kind of like the nucleus of that.
Hmm.
I started just piecing together, hey, like, all right, if I were to recommend like a vision or a North Star to a customer, which is often what they ask us for, especially in the pitch, it's like if we want to differentiate ourselves from five other agencies who can build their mobile app, like what can we position to them that might be unique? And we started positioning like this idea or the concept of the growth stack of like, hey, why don't you put mParticle in your app in addition to, or just that. Let's just start there. Let's put mParticle in your app so that when you want to bring on the next five tools, it's going to be really simple and it's going to be really easy. Um, I think the first customer we did it with was SoulCycle. Their app originally launched, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, like early to mid 2014. Um, and we put mParticle in, and then we put probably a push notification tool in. I think AppsFlyer or something like that was in there. Um, and it was just easy. Like we just used one SDK. Our engineering team was happy, our product manager was happy, and you know it all kind of worked. So and then on top of that, we weren't necessarily thinking of this as a service yet, but on top of that, I would go in there and say, hey, let's look at these analytics in Amplitude or Mixpanel and see where we can kind of optimize things further. And then I would pass that information to our product manager, who would use that to inform the roadmap. And ultimately, as an agency, yeah, we're looking to add value, but we're also looking to keep the roadmap going so that we can keep bringing revenue in from this client. And so it became kind of a win-win where we're bringing like genuine thought leadership to our customer base, um, not just based on industry trends, but based on data that we're seeing in their app. Um, and then we can start saying, well, hey, if we sent a push notification to users, we can re-engage. And the concept of a retention rate isn't really as prevalent on the web. Certainly wasn't at the time. It was more about visits and visitors and page views and kind of more archaic stuff like that, which all goes out the window in mobile. Um, so once we started saying, hey, let's look at your retention rate, it's kind of low. Um, let's send a push notification if we haven't seen a user for a week, and see what happens. And like we just started doing little tricks and experiments like that. Not rocket science, pretty much the most basic push notification campaigns you can set up. But we were able to measure the value really clearly, and at the same time be putting these kind of up and coming SaaS tools in front of our customers and position us as strong thought leaders. And after we did that two or three times, those SaaS companies we were working with really started to appreciate that we were providing that thought leadership and kind of putting them proactively in front of our customers. And then kind of to return the favor, they would say, hey, come to our dinner that we're having for prospects, or hey, would you mind speaking at our conference? And then I started doing that, and then it became really symbiotic, and it kind of opened my eyes to how I could get business out of this on the agency side. And then it kind of snowballed from there where, if we would get new customers from wherever they came from, not partners. And that would be an opportunity for me to introduce partners. And then partners would invite me to their conferences or events or whatever. And I would either speak or just be able to mingle and network. And then I started driving business out of that. And that's kind of really what was the catalyst for what became the growth team and became a pretty big part of our business.
Yeah, that's awesome. And there's so many parts of that that I want to unpack. I think one of the things that people were really interested in is, the Prolific at the time were a design and build agency for mobile apps, right?
Hmm.
And, especially for like quite a few non-mobile or like kind of traditional retail companies, basically like companies that didn't have mobile in their DNA. And a lot of companies were thinking about this, like, hey, we just need a mobile app. And like,
Hmm.
and those projects are kind of big price tag projects, and so it's like
Hmm.
attractive to an agency. You're then coming along and saying, hey, like we should do these like growth services, which is ultimately like quite a different thing. And I think a lot of,
Hmm.
I'm sure you're working on this now with some of your partners, but a lot of people that work in partnerships roles at tech companies, they're meeting agency folks that have complementary services, but maybe it's a different thing. Like they're building the app, but
Hmm.
they're not doing analytics for the app, or they're not
Hmm.
doing like retention or ongoing engagement for the app. And so, like, I'd love
Hmm.
to hear. Like, you obviously had this vision, and you like made it happen, and it was wildly successful at Prolific. But would love to hear like how you kind of got other people on board with that being a thing, just given that it is a departure from the core business that Prolific was doing.
Yeah, like other people within Prolific, you mean?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So, well, I wouldn't say I 100% got everyone bought in, even once it really took off. I
Sure.
think you like where I always struggled, I guess I'll start there, is like getting the product team and the product managers really excited about this. That at the end of the day, they were mostly focused on delivering whatever we promised on time, or as close to on time as possible. And we had some account people, or like some of our most seasoned PMs, who focused more on kind of the next contract and the next scope of work. Um, it it was admittedly very foreign from what we were used to doing, which is like outline a scope of features at a high level that we feel like are technically feasible, and let's build them and let's charge for our time. Talking about, hey, let's productize the idea of like having someone on retainer to just analyze your data and provide recommendations, or setting up campaign, like, I don't know, they people felt like we were moving towards like almost like an advertising agency model in some sense, which people are reluctant to do. Obviously, in a startup, like, focus is the name of the game, and going in too many directions can hurt you. So there was some people who were worried about that. And then, like, you know, once we got over some of those fears, the next step was like, all right, well, how do we like institutionalize this? What Prolific's really kind of specialized in, and one of the reasons Prolific on the product side was so successful, is because they were pioneers in selling in a full product team. So we weren't necessarily selling a completed scope of work. We were selling you a PM, two designers, three engineers, and like a UX person or something like that for X number of months, and you were paying a retainer on the team, and we would work in sprints and et cetera, et cetera. So for a while, we were like, all right, well, let's try plugging a growth manager into that model as well and see how that works, and just make it part of the product team. Um, in cases where the client was like really excited or had already signed multiple SaaS tools that needed to be integrated, that model worked well because we would scope out the whole integration. We would, you know, um, like all the events that had to be tagged. They all have a specific nomenclature. I know Amplitude has built features to try and automate this, but uh, definitely before that, when this is a super manual process that had to be done in a spreadsheet, and like one typo could throw everything off. So you had to be meticulous. It became a big job, um, and to do it right, it was often underappreciated until someone found a mistake down the line for taking a shortcut, and then they realized how valuable it is. But um, in those cases, it was good, and that was usually when we were building an app from scratch. In cases where like maybe it was already there, or you know, to win business where they don't need our product help, they just want growth. Like that model fell apart really fast, and so we found like some success, and I was able to maybe build a 4 or 5 person team on that, but we were still too dependent on the product team, and I wasn't able to really kind of how do I say it? We weren't really able to like reach the full potential of what I felt the growth team could be. So what we ended up doing is spitting the growth team out as its own P&L. Um, and I just ran it as if I was kind of the CEO of it. And as long as it was like profitable, people kind of just left me alone and let me do what I wanted. So I ended up sourcing all my own business for it. Like using our product teams and our product customers as a pool, as a pipeline, but that was just one pipeline. But then this is when I really started going to conferences and going to dinners, and figuring out how to like get into these dinners whenever an M particle or Braze or Amplitude or whatever would like host a 30-person prospect dinner in New York. Like I would see if I can get into those and stuff like that. On the agency side, you got to be scrappy. We don't have these big marketing budgets, and we're not VC backed. We're scraping for everything we have, and so the tactics are certainly a little different. But once I got that, like I ended up signing HBO. We ended up signing Jet.com, um, a number of others, and these were companies who did not have any interest in our product chops. They didn't want to use us to design or build anything. They just wanted us to, help figure out Braze. Like, hey, we just moved off Responsis. We're starting Braze for the first time. We need someone who can advise on the integration, and we need someone who can run campaigns for us. And so once we kind of found that, we continued to support our product teams and sell in where we could. Um, but most of the growth of the team actually came from companies who just basically wanted managed services on top of Braze was the big one, but on top of kind of their growth stack holistically, is kind of what it turned into. And most of the revenue ended up being customers who were only using us for growth. Um, so that's when it really took off. And I think, obviously this ended in 2019, and Brazen and Amplitude in particular have IPO'd since then and probably 5x their own revenue. So, I see all these agencies, including many that I work with today in my capacity at Radar, who are kind of doing the same thing now and seeing a lot of success. So it's exciting to see that model continue to work and be really successful.
Yeah, I think you know, you were suffering from something that a lot of people in partnerships suffer from, which is, you spend a lot of time with partner companies, and you kind of are able to, between those, like, dissect what the future's going to be. You just have better data inputs than other people because you're talking to Amplitude who are really thinking about the analytics space and have like a really distilled perspective on it, but the same thing for Braze and the same thing for M Particle. And so like what you eventually built was like, hey, this is the right way to do product management and growth, and that's where the whole industry was going. But I think it's really tough when the rest of your team just aren't getting those same data inputs, and so
Yeah.
like, so your PM team, and I don't want to disparage anyone because they're an awesome team, but like
Hmm.
they're not going to the Amplitude conference and seeing like the best product teams in the world say, hey, this is how we're running our roadmap now, or like, seeing Andrew Chen at like Braze's conference or whatever else, and
Hmm.
like really digging into that stuff. And so I think it's like this dilemma that everyone in partnerships runs into, where you're kind of living in the future, but you have to also make sure that you're staying in line with where your team's currently at. I think it's like a really tricky thing.
Yeah, I think one other thing that we kind of had to crack that makes it difficult to really integrate this into the product side at Prolific is that we kind of ultimately had different stakeholders and different buyers where um, my team, the growth team would often get hired by marketing, and the product team would often be hired by product, or in these old school companies like quote unquote IT. And so part of it is that it's like, we've heard things like, a client that we have on the IT or product side, they might be like, "Hey, this is really interesting. I see the value, but it's not within my remit, so I'm not going to
Hmm.
pay for it, and I don't really care about it." So we would get blocked in situations like that, and they wouldn't necessarily have the relationship with the marketing team, or maybe they just don't care. Or it's a big company, there's politics, so kind of going off on our own and just finding the right stakeholders for us who believe in what we're doing and support us. I think that had a lot to do with it as well.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it makes a ton of sense. And one of the things you mentioned, and I think people run into this a lot, is like one of them is budget, right? Where like there's some friction or constraints working with agencies. I think, some of the other things are like who manages the relationship with the client and everything else. Like
Mhm.
ultimately you're as the agency partner, you're operating within a certain budget for the customer, and then you know all of these tech companies also are like trying to mostly maximize their revenue if they can, right?
Yeah.
Like how do you manage that friction, especially when you're working with like maybe three different tech providers in one of these growth stack engagements that you would, often three or more, I would say.
Yeah. I'd say like the model that we netted out at that worked the best was when we were working with, or when we were prospecting into a client to start to work with them for the first time. Maybe they sent us an RFP for their mobile app, or we somehow just got in touch and we're talking about that. And we got to the point of budget, and we would say, okay, it's $1 million for Prolific to build your app over the course of 6 months. Um, but we don't want you to feel like you have hidden fees or anything like that. Here's an additional set of costs that you're probably going to incur, that it's not going to come from Prolific, but if you you kind of need a CDP, you kind of need a push tool, you kind of need analytics, you kind of need, whatever you're going to host the app on. Like there's all this other stuff. It's not even limited to app dev. And we just kind of set expectations around that. Probably one of the least favorite questions that SaaS companies would get from me, and maybe you are privy to this, or on the receiving end, is like, can you give me like a pricing model, or can you give me, you know, estimates, or what would, if I walked Walmart into your door tomorrow, what would you charge them? And it was all, the goal of that was for us to try and set expectations with the customer, with our client, so that in 6 months down the line, when we were halfway through the app build and ready to purchase, it would be an easy transaction. Um, Now being in SaaS for about 3 years myself, I have learned why that's not an easy question to answer all the time. Um, but it's just like if we set expectations, then it makes it a lot easier. That on our side. What we also ran into is like we would say, hey, customer X, you should buy a CDP, analytics, an engagement tool, and an attribution tool. And we would, take some calls and get some initial numbers and do some due diligence. And they would say, all right, well, I understand that you want me to buy all four, and then it makes sense, but I only have budget for two right now. Which two should we start with? And I personally, I was a big proponent of starting with a CDP, and we would often recommend that if we thought it made sense. But every single vendor at that point is now out for blood, and trying to justify why they need to be the first one to be implemented. And some of those arguments were good, and some of those arguments were really poor. So at that point, and throughout this whole process, at the end of the day, we have to be a fiduciary for our customer. And we just kind of work with them, and make the best decision possible. And I'm sure I've disappointed a lot of salespeople over the years, as much as I've helped the same and different salespeople. But it's just kind of the reality that we face sometimes, and um, we just had to make those kind of roadmap decisions alongside the client, and help make what we thought was the best decision possible there, and then they would move forward with that. So the most frustrating times were when the customer would say, I don't really buy it. We're just going to keep using Adobe Analytics, and then come back to me a year later with their tail between their legs and say they changed their mind. But um, the budget is just kind of a piece of it, and it really makes you kind of prioritize pretty ruthlessly. And we would just go through those exercises time and time again with our customer base.
And now that you're on the other side and you're kind of working in SaaS, like what would your recommendation be for for people that are working with, on the tech side, they're working with agencies. They're trying to make it really easy for an agency to go out and recommend their product to their customers. They're also trying not to like set incorrect expectations when the pricing eventually should be larger potentially. Like what would be the recommendations that you would have to like make that process as smooth as possible?
I think more often than not, when an agency is asking you for a price, there's no harm in giving them a price range. If you want to protect yourself, make it a little higher than it's going to be, or give them a range. Don't give them a specific number, or outline the pricing model without really putting any numbers on it. But it's like platform fee, support fee, volume based on MAU, and whatever. If you need this feature, it's extra. And like we can at least kind of relay that the to our client, because at Radar, we're guilty of this, but every time I've ever worked with a SaaS company, we're guilty of this, where all the salesperson is trying to do, or all the SaaS company, whoever you're working with, is trying to do, is get an introduction to the brand, um, because the partner team at the SaaS company is gold on getting intros and getting
Hmm.
opportunities created in Salesforce, including my team at Radar. And so we're completely motivated by getting that intro set up. Uh, I think to have a really good partnership, it needs to be a two-way street. And if all you're doing is pulling leads out of an agency, agencies only have like 10 clients. A good sized agency has like 10 clients. Maybe huge ones have more, but you know, you're going to get the two leads that make sense, and then they're never going to talk to you again. So I think it's better to just like build trust with the agency, so that if and when there's a lead for you, they reach out, and it's more of a volume game than it is a surgical game on the agency side, I think. Um, and I think just give them frameworks and set the agency up to know everything about you, and to like really go to bat for you. Figure out who the like kind of champions are. Like you probably want the agencies, they're not really typically called salespeople, but you want like their senior leadership or their business development people to be familiar with you enough to include you in pitches. And pitches on the agency side are often very competitive. And the way to stand out, one is price, but that's like, as with everything, you get what you pay for. The more interesting way to differentiate is what you're actually pitching. And if the client prospect comes to you and says, "Hey, I want to build a mobile app. I don't want it to be a run of the mill retail experience. Give me some ideas of how we can stand out in like the retail space, if maybe Abercrombie comes to you or something like that." Now I'm the BD person at the agency, and I need to go to my bag of tricks and figure out what I want to put in front of this person. And if I could say, "Hey, let me pull in Radar," to use example of my current job, well, let me pull in Radar because maybe we could pitch them something unique about the in-store experience, or we could pitch them something unique about curbside pickup. Uh, now all of a sudden you're giving real value to that person who's trying to win a deal. And to take that a step further, if they reach out to Radar, to my team, and say, "Hey, we are in a pitch with company XYZ. We want to position Radar because we think it'll be well received, and it'll help us win the deal. Can you help us?" We'll jump on that and we'll say, "Hell yeah, like let's we'll build custom collateral for you. We'll send you this case study that's really relevant. we'll do kind of whatever you need. And then like that's kind of what I tell my team to focus on, and how I coach my team is like help people win deals, help people win upsells. And if you're doing that, it might take a little bit to kind of quote unquote build your pipeline, but it'll start to come back to you. And we've seen that happen in a real way at Radar, and partnerships have become a very significant part of our pipeline, um, both on the tech and the agency side. But on the agency side, that's really how we've been able to build trust with all smaller growth agencies, but usually the ones that are really working for us right now are kind of larger product agencies, like a
Mm.
WillowTree or a Bottle Rocket or a Hathaway, Bounteous, companies like that. So yeah, I don't know. That's kind of what I would have to say is like focus less on just getting the intro, getting the intro, getting the intro. Focus more on helping them win deals because they don't have a lot of customers. Uh, and so you got to just go deep on the customers that they have that are within your TAM. And if you help them win deals by promoting your own services, that's going to come back to you pretty shortly after they hopefully win that deal. And if you have a big enough partner ecosystem, you should be working with every company that's pitching to win that piece of business. Also, that's kind of another trick that we have is like if a company puts an RFP out to redo their mobile app, if you are if you want to be best positioned, you should be working with all 5 or 10 companies that they sent that RFP to, so that you have multiple horses in the race, and um, you end up having a very small chance of losing, because all you need is one of your partners to win that deal, start on the work, then they need to introduce you. So I think those two things combined have helped us have a lot of success.
Yeah, yeah, it makes sense, and I've seen the same kind of volume restriction as well. Where the reality is like you can't expect more than maybe one referral or so a quarter from an agency of that size. Like a
Yeah,
really like a smaller boutique, maybe it's like a couple a year, and then like a
yeah,
mid-sized, then yeah, maybe it's like one or at best two a quarter. And so you
yeah.
definitely need some, like you need a decent amount of those types of partners in order to be successful. Like out of interest, roughly like for one of the agency partner managers on your team, like roughly how is their portfolio split? Like what kind of number of partners are they working with, and how's that set up?
I guess the way I think about it is on the agency side, you're often working with the leaders of the company or very senior people. On the tech side, your day-to-day contact anyway is usually, kind of a more junior or mid-level partner manager. So I try to kind of match that. So on the solution or agency side, we call it the solution partner program. I actually pulled an old colleague of mine from Prolific in to run that. Very senior, super experienced, and has a ton of agency experience. And he's done a fantastic job, kind of taking what I started and really leveling it up, and making it just a much more formalized program and building great relationships and growing the amount of pipeline we're able to get from that. And he has someone who's more entry level, junior, working under him who supports the partnerships and does a lot of kind of that infrastructure stuff. Getting new, like focusing on finding new partners, and building the program that way. Focusing on our certification program, which we recently rolled out, and kind of like the nuts and bolts while he learns the ropes and gets to the place where he can kind of manage his own book of business. So that's been working out well. And our solution partner program is probably about 40 partners
Hmm.
right now. And I would say 15 to 20 of them are like active. Um, Maybe 5 of them are like really dormant, and then there's 10 or 15 that are somewhere in the middle. But that is just it's been enough to keep our hands full for sure, and it's been enough to hit our goals consistently. So that's good, and we're at the point now where we're really trying to ramp that up and go international and a number of other things to grow that. On the tech side, we used to split it out by, you know, I have 2 people on the tech side, um, and I would each give them a bucket of partners. But as we scale and kind of get a lot of the foundational infrastructure in place there, like the right collateral and things along those lines, like the work has transitioned more to relationship building, and also as Radar has grown, we've just kind of found it more. It made more sense to break out by geography. So what we have now is someone managing North Americas and someone managing EMEA. And APAC kind of falls into the EMEA category because we don't do too much there. But the geography breakout has it's been good so far. But obviously, again, the Brazes, the Amplitudes, the M particles, they have huge presence in the US. They have huge presence in Europe. They have big presence now these days in APAC, even Australia. So you know, I can't I can't really assign Braze to a partner manager. I have to,
Mhm.
it just made more sense to transition to geography, and so that's how the team's set up now. And we're humming. We crushed our goals the last 2 quarters, and it's been a lot of fun.
Awesome. Yeah, tell us a little bit more about the technology partner business. I think that like particularly for a product like Radar, where there's complementary partners in the space, but then obviously there's like integration partners that make the product really come to life and be valuable. Like how's that set up in your team? Is some of it on the product team? Is it all on your team? Like how does it work?
Yeah, so my team ultimately is responsible for driving leads from our partners, and we're also the liaison or the contact into any of the partners that we have. Most of our tech partners are we're integrated with. In fact, nearly all of them in some way. Um, and yeah, I mean, we have support from our marketing team in terms of building like higher quality collateral and things along those lines. Collaborating on events is a big one that we lean on our marketing team to support us on. Um, and then when it comes to like integration, updates or like getting to the next level of an integration, we're usually collaborating with our product team. If if the need to kind of level up an integration comes from maybe our CSM team or something like that, it might go like from them directly to product and then we get updated. But if it's the partner coming to us and saying, hey, there's this exciting new thing coming out, we'd like Radar to be a part of it, then that's when we would go to the product team and say, hey, can we get this prioritized? Here's the business case. This is why it's important. Um, but yeah, like at the end of the day, our team, the BD team, um, interfaces with partners the most, and we're kind of um, just that main point of contact. And whenever it comes to lead sourcing or getting intel for them, sending leads their way, that's kind of what we're focused on day in and day out.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think so. One of the things that we ran into, given that you're in the same space still, I'm interested to pick your brain a little bit. But one of the things we ran into was like M Particle or Segment were an amazing partner for us because
Hmm.
they, like people would implement them and then they would implement us, right?
Yeah,
But if we were introduced first, we're not a great partner for them because like it was always like infinitely better for someone to implement our product directly, and so we would
yeah,
never like it would never be our preference for someone to use
yeah,
a CDP because it was just not as good, like a lot of things didn't work right, and like the data was often messy. It would be really hard work for the CS team. And so like we would be very careful about how we articulated that, but it was unlikely that we were going to send many referrals back to Segment and to M Particle, as much as us on the partner team would absolutely have loved to been able to do that. We were
hmm,
just downstream from them in the decision process, right? And I imagine like it's somewhat similar for you guys at Radar, where people probably have a few other things in place before they even get to a product like yours, right? Given that you definitely like enhance a lot of existing products. So how do you
yeah.
think about how are you thinking about generating value for your tech partners? Like, is it just a downstream thing, or like, can you do some of the like part? Can you add value to the partners before you as well in that decision making process?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we definitely think a lot about this downstream versus upstream thing. I think the reality is radar is downstream from most of our partners. Location is, I don't think it needs to be like a quote unquote advanced feature, but it is perceived that way. Um, and especially when we're coming into like marketing automation use cases, which we do a lot of, like Braze, Iterable, Airship are three of our uh, most frequently used integrations. Because if you want to send a location based or geofence triggered push notification, we don't do that on our own. We do the trigger, and then you need one of those partners to send the push. So they're all usually upstream from us. And the way that we've been able to make those successful is in a few ways. One is building relationships with their CSM team and uh, creating stories and narratives and case studies that demonstrate how if their customer uses radar and activates radar, it creates stickiness for them. It allows them to ingest more events, which creates revenue for them. Um, and it's more of an NRR play for them than an ARR play. So we try to talk more to the people who care about NRR and like less to the AEs, to be honest. So that's kind of one part of it. The other part is we can add a lot of value, not only within our customer base, but we also have a lot of opportunities and a lot of like customers that we're speaking with, or sorry, like prospects that we're speaking with. Um, that aren't necessarily customers yet, but we can still facilitate intel or intros. So there's a lot of opportunity to do that too. And then the third is the silver lining of COVID for Radar is uh, the restaurant space all of a sudden needed, and the retail space needed solutions for curbside pickup, like kind of overnight. And it was a big boon for us. And so all of a sudden, all these companies came to us who actually weren't super tech forward or didn't really focus too much on their mobile experience to that point. In the last 2 years, almost every restaurant brand has completely revamped their digital strategy and now they focus on this stuff. But there was a good pocket there where we were actually the first piece of tech being bought because they needed curbside so badly. So we've kind of gotten good at identifying, all right, where can we fit into use cases or where can we fit into business needs in ways that don't completely rely on having Braze there before us. Because a, it's not healthy to rely that much on any other provider. It's not even limited to Braze, but an engagement platform. And so for us to really have breakout growth, we need to figure that out anyway. But once we cracked that nut, we were able to become a little more of a downstream and kind of make it a little more of a balanced relationship in a lot of cases.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think that that's like a an amazing insight around really orienting towards the teams where you like deliver the most value, and also like,
Hmm.
where where the referral really realistically is going to come from.
Hmm.
We definitely saw the same thing as well, where quite often the partnerships team or the sales team would be blockers for us rather than people that would help us get value, like, or create mutual value in a partnership. We'd have to like work around the partnerships team until we could do a few deals, and then suddenly they'd be interested, right?
Hmm.
Just because it didn't necessarily fit into the traditional mold, because we weren't upstream from them, we were downstream. But
Yeah.
eventually it was something that worked really well for us as well.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I could talk to you about this all day, and I think we have done a few times in the past, and I would love
Yeah.
to do it again in the future. But as we kind of come to a close right now, love to just ask you our regular question of, what's something that you've learned recently that you would be excited to share with the folks that are listening today?
Well, I guess one thing I've been playing around recently with that has been really exciting is dabbling into like automation of partnerships. there's this new company I have been, or new product, I should say, that I've been kind of playing with and messing around with called Superglue. Brand new company, but they're taking on automation, or they're building an automation product for partnerships teams. And it has challenged me to think about how we work in a very different way, where, uh, if you're tracking your partnership contacts, of which, for our top partners, maybe there's 100 or more. Um, how do you maintain closer relationships with them? How do you keep them up to date on the latest and greatest at Radar? How do you really have that one to many relationship? Um, Especially that we're not in OEM deals, we're not resell. We don't have resell. Like, we're not a SKU for these AEs or for these CSMs. So it's really a relationship based partnership model, and that's hard. That's hard to scale. It's inherently hard to scale, and it's the same way on the agency side. So um, I've been thinking about how do we, automate this a little bit to where it still feels super personal, but we can just have more touches, and we can have, keep people more up to date on Radar. So um, I think if maybe we talk again in 3 or 6 months, I'll have better insights into how I'm doing this. But right now, I'm just excited that there are people thinking about that, and it's starting to I think it'll probably only pick up. And I think it's also a testament to how far the partner ecosystem and partner discipline has come, that there's even tech like this being made and being considered. And tip of the hat to you guys, tip of the hat to Crossbeam, tip of the hat to all these great companies that are kind of building for the ecosystem space. It's exciting to see. We're using a lot of that stuff, and it's only going to keep coming. So the automation piece and keeping an eye out for that over the next couple of years, I think, is maybe the one thing that I'm learning that I'm excited about, and then I would encourage other people to look into.
Awesome. Yeah, I got a sneak peek at what they were doing from Rob while we were all at Catalyst last week. And it
Nice.
was awesome to get a look at the product, and quite excited to get my hands on it and test it out as well. Like you say, there's some really interesting tech that's coming out at the moment, like, what Superglue are working on. Also, a company called Collabi who's doing OKRs for partners, like,
Hmm.
I'm sure you, while at Prolific, had a lot of like partner plan documents given to you by different partner tech
Yeah.
companies that you like never looked at again after that one meeting, or like maybe glanced at 5 minutes before the next QBR.
Yeah.
There's just so many interesting solutions here for folks. I think just so undercated to for a line of business that in the worst case often is like 10% of total revenue, but quite often is like
Hmm.
upwards of 30-40% of total revenue for a company. So
Hmm.
yeah, really excited about what's coming along there as well. Amazing stuff. Well, Al, thank you so much again for joining me. I mean, like I say, this is fascinating stuff and I could dig into it forever. I think people really struggle with working with boutique agencies, and I think that experience that you've got is obviously like setting you up for a bunch of success at Radar. And this experience with the whole stack and working with partnerships teams is really valuable. So I really appreciate you sharing it with everyone.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me on, Ty. It's always great to chat, and yeah, we'll definitely talk soon.